Hello and welcome to Farm Journal Live. I'm editor Clinton Griffiths from our newsroom here in northern Indiana as we continue to bring you the latest on the coronavirus outbreak and its impacts on agriculture. We start with a quick look at a press conference happening live right now. This is on the White House Facebook page. The president and his task force here taking questions from reporters, discussing a new project to try to develop a vaccine, a partnership between the private sector, military, public sector, talking about how they're going to be rolling this out and how they're trying to get it to the American population as quickly as possible. This happening now. Let's go to some other news happening around the countryside. Commodities up across the board following another turbulent week. Heavy rains falling across the Midwest, with some places getting up to 4, even 5 inches of rain over the last 2 days. Fields already planted are now covered in standing water. You'll remember over the weekend and start the week, many places seeing heavy and hard freezes and frost to start the week. So those crops now look like we may see some replanting in wide parts of the country. This follows a few other bright spots this week. China making several big buys of U.S. grains, including about 200,000 metric tons of soybeans, 20,000 metric tons of soybean oil yesterday. Even as that phase 1 trade deal between the U.S. and China moves forward, those tensions between leaders remain high. President Trump discussing trade this week, saying his relationship with Chinese leader Xi Jinping is, quote, a very good relationship, but right now he doesn't want to talk to him, end quote. Even as Chinese customs posted a notice that U.S. barley and blueberries will now be allowed into the country, the shift confirmation that the provisions in that phase 1 agreement continue to be implemented and move forward. We're going to bring in Chris Narayanan now. He's a market analyst, investment banker. And Chris, we've had kind of a mixed bag of news this week as far as, you know, how it's going to impact the overall ag economy. What's your take on where we stand kind of, I don't know, 8 weeks into this pandemic?
You know, hey, Clinton, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
It is, it's an interesting thing. And I guess the first comment I would have is take things in perspective, right? I mean, we've been in an oversupplied market for quite some time, right? And then we had to deal with the trade wars last year and then the coronavirus this year. And so obviously this does not help the situation. But we were in a pretty, bad situation to begin with, right? So I think it's just going to continue to delay the recovery unless we see some kind of massive uptick in demand.
Right, yeah, we're looking for that demand. Obviously, this weather this week maybe is going to force some folks to either have to replant or maybe take a little bit off the top yield of our production. But we're still, on corn specifically, we're still looking at a really huge, massive crop. And ethanol's not helping us out.
No, it's not. And when you look at, and I'll get to ethanol in a second, but think about what's going on now in cold storage and with the restaurants shutting down and buying patterns are different now for foodstuffs, right? And so we've seen a huge oversupply in the meat markets, and that filters down to the ranches. And so incrementally, there's less feed demand there. Same thing with ethanol, where, we're in a situation people aren't driving like they used to. I mean, my truck, I think I filled it up a month and a half, 2 months ago, and it's still sitting at about a half a tank. I just don't go anywhere. So there's less ethanol that you need to blend with that.
Yeah, as we start to try to work our way out of this, Chris, what indicators are there? Is there anything that you're watching to say, hey, keep an eye on this. This may be something that could start to show that we're turning a corner on this ag economy?
I think part of it will be consumer behavior. I mean, we saw some pretty massive drops in retail sales that came out this morning, and certainly not unexpected. And, some people thought it was worse than expected. Others were thinking it was going to be worse. But I think, we have to see with states like here in Tennessee, we started opening up a couple weeks ago, but we're still doing it very slowly, 25% here, 50% there. And I think the indication is how quickly the consumer comes back, and especially some of these retail outlets that have been shut down for so long.
Yeah, as we talk about that, I think retail sales down 16.4%, factory production falling by nearly 14%. Both of those, right, I believe, fresh records here. So it is a big lift, not just for our economy, but Chris, we're talking a global economy situation as well.
We are. I mean, and you look at buying patterns and where manufacturing centers are, and it's easy to pick on China, and it was the cheapest place for manufacturing for a long time. But I remember 6, 7 years ago having conversations with companies that were relocating to other parts of Asia because China had just gotten expensive. The market starts to adjust. But when you look at these global supply chains and where everything is kind of based, I think one of the things that's going to come out of this is I would hope to see is more what I would call enterprise risk management, where you're looking at your entire organization and trying to mitigate it so you're not beholden to any one particular part. Now, obviously, that comes at a cost, so there's going to be some give and take there. But I think people will probably start looking at their systems a little bit more closely and try to forecast some, pinch points there.
Well, and it is interesting. We've talked about it in the meat sector, the bottlenecks that we have for getting supply from the ranch to the consumer. We've talked about it in a lot of different industries where, it's really a supply chain problem. A lot of the PPE stuff that we saw was a supply chain issue. And thankfully, China and Mexico didn't both have a problem at the same time because they provided a lot of that type of equipment for us. As you look at the Dow and we talk about some of the current stock price that we see out there on Wall Street, are we seeing a disconnect? Are we going to start to see some more pressure being put on our overall our overall economy here in the U.S.?
And I think one of the things, Clint, to keep in mind is the stock market is not the economy. Now, certainly it is an indication and it is something that you want to watch, but by whatever metric you use, the price of a stock or or any stock index like the S&P or the Dow is basically the present value of future earnings or future benefits of some sort, right? What are you willing to pay today for a future value? And so as those expectations and the willingness to buy or not to buy changes with new information, that's what is going to affect the price of each individual stock and then the market as a whole. And so when we look at retail sales, when we look at unemployment numbers and we look at everything is backwards looking. So it's kind of confirming or not or refuting, what we expected to happen in a given period. So now the trick is to look forward and say, all right, where do we go from here? And that's where I say, looking at consumer activity, just how many cars are on the road and, what retail centers look like right now. I mean, here in Memphis, where we're based, you see a lot of these stores where they're open, they might only allow 25%, but you know what? They might not even get more than 10% capacity because people are still not willing to go out. And I don't know that for sure. I'm just using that as an example. But the point is, how quickly will the consumers come back? I mean, certainly there are people with cabin fever, and then there are people that are legitimately scared. And so where does that meet in the middle? And then what does that do for earnings today, as well as what it takes to kind of reset and come back to where we were before?
Yeah, we do know that it is going to take a little while for people to start to feel fully comfortable, and obviously for us to adjust to all of the changes that have been made. And Chris, it does feel like we have changed the way that a lot of commerce is going to happen. I mean, all the safety measures we've installed in some of these packing houses and processing facilities, I don't expect those to change anytime soon.
No, I mean, I think, when you think about regulated industries like that, it takes time. Now, there's something to be said about, and I read something a week or two ago about maybe turning over regulation to the states and let them decide. From a practical standpoint, I don't know if that's going to make much of a difference because you're going to have to redo everything that you've done already. Obviously, some of those standards are going to remain the same. I don't think it's going to be the Wild West by any means. But it's really, what does it take to make it efficient? And is that the right way to improve efficiency? Or are there certain bottlenecks that we should be looking at and still let the USDA regulate it?
Yeah, there are so many different moving parts to this puzzle. Of course, we'll continue to follow along. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate the insights as always.
Hey, thanks for having me, Clint.
Absolutely.
Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. McDonald's asking owners to make dozens of changes at their stores following today's coronavirus concerns, including cleaning bathrooms every half hour, wiping down digital kiosks after each order. It's also asking stores to enforce social distancing at its restaurants and either close the public soda fountains or deploy staff members to monitor them. This comes from a new 59-page dine-in reopening guide. Just another way that we're looking at what's going on and how this coronavirus could have long-lasting impacts on the way that we live. As you prepare for the weekend, we know you may be a little bit worn out by this coronavirus conversation. Of course, we've got you covered over at agweb.com. We're going to be featuring a collection of stories from our very own Chris Bennett with Farm Journal. And Chris, thank you for joining us here today. We've got both Chris's on Farm Journal Live today. But Chris, we tasked you with picking out a few of your favorite stories. Let's just start with the very first one, an interesting story. And that's kind of what you do, is you write kind of a little longer form, really unique, different type of stories.
Hey, Clinton, good morning. It's a privilege to be on here with you, man. The first story, it comes to mind, one that punches me in the sternum, punches me in the Adam's apple, is a gentleman named Samson Parker in North Carolina. Samson, I believe it was about 2007. He was about 40 years old, got dressed, walked out of his house, or was fixing to walk out of his house to go cut corn. Everything was normal. And he reached over on the dresser and grabbed a tiny pocket knife, about a 3-inch blade. Had never done that before, had never carried one in his pocket before, and to this day, he claims he's never carried one since. But he got out there picking corn, and he was in a 3-vehicle caravan, tractor, picker, wagon. Essentially, he had to get out of that tractor. He had to go mess with some compaction inside the picker, got his arm caught in there. And Clinton, when he got his arm caught in there, he had to cut his fingers off with that pocket knife. And as he was doing so, he still couldn't extract his hand. The picker caught fire. And when it caught fire, he then had a choice, man. I'm going to burn or I'm going to cut more. And he had to cut his arm off while it was on fire and then escape. The whole thing wrapped together. He claims there was divine intervention directly there in the field. And his story is, to me, his account is
epic, and just an incredible story of someone having to think through that and having to make that decision and go through it. I mean, it's what an incredible story. Now, one of your other ones that you have here is called "Living the Dream: Honoring a Fallen Soldier." Tell us about that one. A fallen farmer, excuse me.
I tell you what, Clinton, one of the saddest stories I've come across. It was a 28-year-old young man, really the scion of his family. Was going to take over. He was in that process. Again, he was 28, beloved, very fine family. He was tilling one May morning, I believe it was in 2014, and he let his little puppy dog that was in the cab with him all the time, get out to use the bathroom. And when he did, the dog started playing with a mouse. And when he got down out of the cab and he went and picked up the mouse, he thought it was dead. And when he did, the mouse bit him on the finger. And 10 days later, he was dead. His name was Brock Gussius. And 10 days later, he was dead. What had happened was he had contracted hantavirus. His family didn't know. And it devastated his system. And I believe it was 2 days before he died, he actually walked in from the fields, wrote out his will at the living room table, left the will on the living room table for his family to find, and laid down on the bed. And 2 days later, he was dead. Absolutely devastated a farming family. So odd, bizarrely unique, but definitely that story sits on my shoulder.
Absolutely. Well, and it honors the memory of somebody. And I know it sounds like a pretty tough story to read, but the heart that it's told with and the way that you learn about who this young man was and his story and what he had dreams for is just phenomenal. Talk about one of the wildest stories in agriculture that you've covered in a while. This one's pretty good, Chris.
Clinton, Hogzilla. How's that? I could just say Hogzilla and leave it right there. But, I don't know what the latest numbers are. Maybe 6-7 million hogs, wild pigs in the United States. You've seen the estimates, maybe hundreds of millions in damage to agriculture every year. And a fellow named Michael Mims in Mississippi Delta came across a 750-pound wild pig. Actually, it was a wild escape, a pen escape, excuse me. It wasn't your traditional Russian boar kind of hog. And he wound up needing 4 curs, 2 pit bulls, 4 or 5 people. They didn't have any guns. They all had, I believe it was 12 to 15-inch blades. Took them 30, 45 minutes to get this hog stopped. And he was dragging them through the cornfields. This hog, Clinton, was eating whole corn plants.
Wow.
He wasn't eating corn. He wasn't eating leaf. He was eating whole corn plants. They finally got him trapped in a slough. They only managed to get him stopped because he got stuck by vegetation and growth, and they were able to put him down. But uh, in the annals of wild pig stories, of which, man, you know, you've got whole compendiums. This one, in my opinion, it'll definitely catch your eye. It's
This has
wild.
got to be one of my favorite all-time stories you've written. So if you guys haven't read Hogzilla, you got to go and read this by Chris Bennett. It is definitely worth the read. Quite the yarn that you tell there, Chris. Hey, one more real quick. We got this. I've been seeing some videos of folks while they're going across their fields right now, finding some deer sheds out there. But you met a guy that might be maybe top of the game as far as finding deer sheds.
Yes, sir, Clinton. I think he's the legend. His name is Jimmy Cassell. Lives down just a little bit north of Natchez, Mississippi, and he's got a lot of land, but on a particular 1,000 acres, it's got sloughs in the river around it. So really, he's on a peninsula, and on this ground, every year he finds about anywhere 60 to 80 sheds. He's found several thousand in his lifetime, and you know, in this area of the country, to find that many sheds is beyond phenomenal. And these are all fine specimens. So inside his house, he's got Christmas tree stacks of sheds. He's got furniture made from sheds. And the rest of us are out there seeing if we can find, you know, 5 or 10 sheds, but a year. But you take a man, a farmer, a dog, deer, sheds, fields, wrap that all together. Come on, you can't get much better than that.
No, you can. That makes for a pretty good read. And Chris, that's what we're going to try to do this weekend. We're going to try to give folks just a little something, some variety to read this weekend, some of your favorite stories here that we've been running through. You can go to agweb.com, and it's going to be featured right there on the front page. Chris, always fun to visit with you, and appreciate all the work that you do and the great stories that you find in agriculture. This is a good time to maybe go and read something that's a little bit different, right, Chris?
You bet. Hey, thank you, Clinton. Privileged to be on here.
Yeah,
man.
absolutely,
Take care.
Chris. Thanks so much. Now, one other thing that we want to cover today before we get out of here, you know, we've been asking for you to share your pictures with us, and you've delivered. We want you to show and tell us and really share with us how you're farming on, how you plan to farm on in this time with the coronavirus. Well, today we've got a premiere of your farm on photos here exclusively on Farm Journal Live. Take a look. It started as social distancing, self-isolation, and caring for loved ones. A time for agriculture to be proud, to be essential. Now, it's changing. While states start to reopen and jobs resume, out here, the clouds are building. The path is uncertain. It's not the first time, it won't be the last. But we'll farm on. This soil is soaked in generations of sweat, of reinvention, of grit. Farm on is a calling. It's a mantra, a mindset. When the horizon dims and things turn dark, we'll find the light. We may be doing this for you, but we're also doing it for them. 2020, now's the time to farm on. The pictures, the emotion, the feeling, what it means to farm on has been very powerful. We thank you for sharing that with us. If you'd like to go ahead and keep doing it, we'll keep looking at them. We'll keep sharing them ourselves. You can post them on social media, #FarmOn, or you can text them to us at FarmOn to 31313. I want to thank all of you for taking a few minutes of your day to spend with us here on Farm Journal Live. Of course, you can keep up with the latest in our coverage by going to agweb.com/coronavirus, or again, just join us on agweb.com for the very latest in the news impacting our agricultural industry. Everyone, have a great afternoon.